Hi, my name is Bob Fitz and I'm the CEO of V3, a management consulting firm headquartered in Miami, Florida that specializes in helping small and medium-sized businesses in a wide variety of industries improve their performance. This is the third in a series of webcasts that we are preparing to assist small and medium-sized businesses to endure the COVID-19 crisis. Our first episode was an introductory episode which provided the perspectives of our principals on the situation in general. The second episode dove deeply into cash flow and liquidity management and was presented excellently primarily by our colleague Gary Nocht. Both of these episodes may be found on our website at v3llc.co on the media page. Today's episode is entitled Surviving Economic Crisis: Assess, Reformulate, Execute, and we'll deal primarily with commercial strategies today, essentially using a three-phase process to help you endure the crisis. Let's get started. There is a three-phase process to employ to survive economic crisis, which we refer to as the path to success. The first phase is the assessment phase, where you will gather intelligence around key areas of your business, essentially trying to understand what's going on now and what's expected to go on in the short, intermediate, and, if the information is available, in the long term as well. The second phase is the reformulation phase, where the leadership team will take the information gathered in the assessment phase, analyze it, and formulate new business plans that entail new strategies and new tactics. The third phase is the execution phase, where those new plans will be implemented. Another way to think of the three phases is that the assessment phase is the informational phase. The reformulation phase is the phase in which decisions are made and plans are made to implement those decisions. The third phase, the execution phase, is the action phase. It is the implementation phase of those plans. Before we begin, it's important to emphasize some general concepts about surviving economic crisis. Crises are by nature dynamic. Seemingly, as soon as one problem is resolved, others arise. It often feels like it's 2 steps forwards and 1 step backwards. It's a stressful time as well. Key constituents are stressed, including, importantly, your employees. Therefore, leadership mindset matters. It's important that the leadership team remain flexible, resilient, open, opportunistic, and empathic. It's also important to constantly gather intelligence about all aspects of your business. A part of this, of course, will be communication, and in general, more communication is better than less, especially with your key constituents. It's also important to develop a culture of urgency to survive a crisis. Slow and perfect is not the way to endure a crisis. Good and fast is. The perfect is the enemy of the good. Once you have good information and your leadership team analyzes it and draws some conclusions, make decisions quickly and move on. Study after book recount episodes where in retrospect management wishes it had moved faster. Get things off your to-do list and remain flexible. Move on. You'll also want to develop an interfunctional crisis team. This is oftentimes the same as the leadership team. When it's not, it's important that proxies either have decision-making authority or the ability to get decisions made quickly, and that they be subject matter experts in the area that they are representing. Also, consider getting help. Crisis and turnaround management skills are specialized and not necessarily the same skills needed for day-to-day management. There are experts such as those of us at V3 who have guided other organizations in different verticals through many crises and can leverage the commonalities and patterns we've seen in other situations for your benefit. These experts also can bring a dispassionate view to the situation. They are not as close to the stress as you are, and that distance perspective can help you make sound decisions. Lastly, consider that these skills are also rentable. These arrangements can be structured in ways that are interim, flexible, and temporary, and economically feasible for you. The first phase of our three-phase process to survive economic crisis is the assessment phase, where you will undertake a broad and deep investigation of 6 key areas of your business Starting first, of course, with your financial position, as you need to get a sense of how well capitalized you are and how much cash you have on hand. You'll also want to look at certain key levers that you can push and pull in order to affect that financial position positively. Once you have a grasp of this, you'll want to look at the market and get a sense of essentially how much do you think your market will be up or down in the short and the intermediate term, and if the information is available in the long term as well. Once you have that context, you'll want to get a sense of your competitive sphere. Are any of your competitors in trouble? Are any expanding? Or have any new entrants entered your market? You'll also want to get a sense of the health of your customers. These are your key revenue sources. You'll talk to them directly, and you'll also leverage an intelligence system to learn about them in the marketplace. You'll perform the same exercise on your supply chain. You'll want to investigate, are there any risks there, and what other providers could be obtained if necessary. Lastly, you'll want to look at your organizational structure and your operational infrastructure in the context of what's going on in these other 5 key areas of your business, as these areas of your business may have to be adjusted based on what's happening with your market, your competitive environment, your customers, your supply chain, and your financial position. A couple of notes on assessments in general before we get into the details. The first concept is that the degree of formality and the depth of the assessment will vary with the scale and complexity of the business. This isn't as complex of an exercise most likely for a one product, one geography, one market business as it is for a business with multiple products in multiple geographies and multiple markets, the latter of which may require needing to obtain third-party market research assistance. While you're doing your assessment, you'll also want to determine risk, look for ways to de-risk situations, and look for ways to mitigate risk in general. You'll also want to identify opportunities, as one person's crisis is another person's opportunity, and this may be your opportunity. Also look for optionality. You'll want to remain flexible as you go through this ongoing crisis. After you've gathered your information, you're going to want to ask yourself, what is the quality of your visibility? How confident are you in the information you've gathered? How confident are you in the overall assessment? And the reason that this will matter is, at the end of this, in the reformulation phase, all this information gets pulled into new plans, new targets, production quotas, and importantly, a forecast. The less confident you are in your visibility and the information you've gathered, the more variability there will be between your base case modeling scenarios and your high or best case or low or worst case scenarios. As we said before, the first area of assessment is to assess your financial position. I mentioned before that this was covered by our colleague Gary Nacht in the last episode that we have on our website about cash flow and liquidity management in times of crisis. I'm not going to repeat it all here. I'll just hit some high points that Gary made better in detail in that episode. You'll want to look at your cash on hand and how well capitalized you are. Also taking a look at your receivables and an aging schedule. Look at your payables. Assess what are your terms and do you have the ability to renegotiate them. Also look at orders, both orders you have placed and orders that people have placed with you. You'll want to look at your inventory. Again, an aging schedule would be helpful. You'll also want to assess fixed and variable overhead. This includes the important area of staffing. You'll want to look into your lines of credit and other forms of financing that you have already. Are there terms that can be renegotiated to your favor? Lastly, and very importantly, as Gary pointed out, all of this gets rolled into a 16-week rolling cash flow forecast. This is a critical management tool during crises such as this. Now that you've gotten a feel for your financial position, you'll want to look at the market. And this is the big picture that frames your overall commercial situation. Essentially, how much up or down is your traditional market or markets expected to be for the next 30 to 180 days, which is really the short term. Also, are there variations by geography, market segment, or by products? Or is this a universal blanket situation regardless of which geography or which market segment or which products you have? Are there any new regulatory or legal constraints that you're aware of? Are these fixed or temporary? And are you aware of any others that are coming down the line? You may want to leverage legal assistance or a lobbying firm, depending on the complexity of your business, to get a handle around this. Also, what beyond the short term? What is the intermediate term, and what do the long term look like? And what we've been talking about here is the demand side of the business. What about the supply side? You'll want to assess that as well. Now that you have your market context, you'll want to look at your competitive sphere. And you'll want to assess, have any of your competitors exited the field, or are any for sale? Has there been any consolidation? Are there any new entrants into the market? What intelligence are you hearing from suppliers, customers, employees, and contacts about the state of your competitors? Who is rumored to be in trouble, and what would the effect be on you, if any? You'll also want to assess, are there opportunities to purchase any competitors? This may be a great time to do so. As we said before, one person's crisis is another person's opportunity. And do some intelligence on yourself. What's the word on the street about your organization? You'll want to address it, especially if it's not true. Also, what is the state of pricing and promotion across geographies and products? Has the current environment created new opportunities in terms of products or your ability to grab market share? And you'll also want to assess, has the cost of business increased or decreased, and what does that mean to you? The analytical exercise for assessing your customers is really the same as you did for your competitors. Again, have any of your customers exited the field, or any for sale? Has there been any consolidation? Have new customers entered the market? You'll also want to leverage your information sources. What intelligence are you hearing from suppliers, competitors, employees, and contacts about the state of your customers? Who of your customers are rumored to be in trouble? And again, what would the effect be on you, if any? Also, are there opportunities to assist in the sale or merger of any of your customers? Very importantly, you'll need to stratify your customers by volume, margin, and pay status to really understand who is where. Lastly, pick up the phone. Have you talked with your most important customers? Again, the 80-20 rule is important, but good, clean lines of communication are important. In times of crisis, lack of communication breeds anxiety and bad assumptions. Don't wait for that to happen. Get on the phone with your key customers, get on the phone with your key suppliers, find out what's really going on, or find out as much as you can about what's going on. The next step is to look at your supply chain. Now, businesses vary. Some are traditional manufacturing and hard product businesses, and there is a true supply chain. But for service business, it's really your product delivery chain. The concept should still apply here, though. You'll want to assess whether any of your suppliers are in trouble or rumored to be in trouble, and what would the effect be on you if this is true? Do you have alternative suppliers lined up, and how hard would it be to line them up if you had to? And if you did, what would the effect be on your pricing or timing of delivery? It's possible that new suppliers won't have the same pricing and won't have the same timing. Again, like we talked about with our customers, pick up the phone. Have you talked with your most important suppliers? Also, you'll want to leverage that market intelligence system that you've built as well. What are you hearing about your suppliers in the market? We've looked at 5 key areas of our business. We've looked at our financial position, market, competitive sphere, customers, and supply chain. And it's now time to assess our organizational structure and operational infrastructure in light of what we've learned in these other areas. It's time for some really fundamental questions, and in some cases, painful questions. The first question to ask is, does the organizational model still even fit? Do we need the departments that we have and the reporting structures that we've had historically, and do they apply for the short, medium, and the long term? Do we have the right infrastructure model relative to what we've learned? Do we need the offices, plants, equipment, etc. that we've had historically? It's now time to ask what processes, facilities, or equipment could be modified, consolidated, rationalized, or outsourced to increase productivity or decrease cost, or simply to survive, if that's what our assessment has us asking. Also, we need to ask if we're leveraging technology and technology resources appropriately. And the elephant in the room underlying all of these is, are we staffed appropriately for the go-forward model? That's the tough question. By looking at the 6 key areas of our business, our financial position, market, competitive sphere, customers, supply chain, and operational infrastructure and organizational structure, we've completed the assessment phase. It's now time to move on to phase 2, the reformulation phase, where the leadership team will pull together the information gathered in the assessment phase, analyze it, and distill it into new business plans. This is an extensive if X then Y formulation across these 6 key areas of our business. If we learned X about the market, we'll want to do Y. If we learned X about our key competitors, we'll want to do Y. If we learned X about our most important customer, we'll want to do Y, etc. And all of this gets modeled out into our 16-week rolling cash flow model and also into our short, intermediate, and long-term forecasts. And these forecasts will entail these new strategies, tactics, and targets. The process may also yield a different type of PPP, so to speak. Pivot, pause, or punt. We may need to pivot our business model relative to what we've learned in the assessment phase. Or we may need to pause certain operations or activities as a result of what we've learned as well. And in some cases, it's simply time to punt, to divest the business or stop an operation. As we did in the assessment phase, we'll begin the reformulation phase by first focusing on our finances. As I said before, Gary Knott covered this excellently in episode 2, and again, that's on our website on the media page. And I'm not going to repeat what he said in that here, but I'll try to hit some of his high points. Some of the tactics to employ would include, with respect to receivables, accelerating and decreasing these, offering incentives to do so, and being more aggressive on collections. For payables, it's really the reciprocal, and you'll want to decelerate and increase these, renegotiate terms, reduce order quantities, and increase order frequency. For inventory, you'll want to mark down aged inventory and shift to higher margin SKUs. For fixed and variable overhead, you'll want to conduct a line-by-line review, making cuts and renegotiating where appropriate. For lines of credit, Gary covered this really well in episode 2, and he suggests that some of the terms here are more negotiable than people realize, and he suggests seeking higher advances, lower reserves, and better covenants. With respect to other financings, you may need to raise additional debt or equity or pursue other alternative financing structures, such as asset-based lending. All of this gets rolled into your 16-week rolling cash flow model, as well as your short, medium, and long-term forecasts with KPIs and dashboards. Again, this is critical. These are the key management tools. Again, as in the assessment phase, once we've gotten our arms around our financial position, it's time to look at the business itself. And in the reformulation phase, it's now time to reformulate our commercial strategies and tactics. And this is based primarily on our assessment of our market, our competitive sphere, and our customers. So it would now be time to make formal plans to exit or enter markets, geographies, and products as appropriate based on what we've learned relative to the short, medium, and the long term. It would now also be time to make formal plans to explore joint ventures, new partner distribution arrangements, and new channels. In general, it's now time to make formal plans for acquisition, disposition, and liquidation alternatives. It would now also be time to make formal plans to alter our product mix. It's now time to prioritize your customer base and perhaps to make plans to terminate lower yield, high cost, slow pay clients. My colleague Edward Brookshire talks about this a lot and says that this is one of the 2 most painful areas of decision making in this process, the other being should you have to engage in a reduction of force. It's possible that you've had clients that historically have been good clients, but lately they've become delinquent, extremely delinquent. Or you found out in your assessment that their business is in serious jeopardy. Perhaps there are rumors of bankruptcy. If that is the case, you can no longer afford to play banker to them, and you may have to terminate such a relationship. Of course, this would not have been done until there have been significant conversations with them and all other opportunities have been explored, but still, it's a decision that might have to be made. This is also the time to make formal plans to either consolidate or diversify your suppliers. And we haven't talked much about marketing, but it's now also the time to make plans to align your marketing with your new commercial strategies. It's now time to reformulate strategies relative to our organizational structure and our operational infrastructure. We said during the assessment phase that the assessment of these areas was derivative of the assessment of the other areas of your business, your finances, the market, customers, competitors, and your supply chain. The business plans relative to your organizational structure and your operational infrastructure are similarly derivative. So now is the time to make specific plans to modify, consolidate, rationalize, or outsource as necessary, if that's what your assessment determined and your new business plans in these other areas dictate. Again, it would now be time to make specific plans about streamlining the organizational structure to the new commercial model, if appropriate. Part of that would, of course, involve rationalizing and realigning staff, and changing your permanent employee, 1099, work from home, and part-time mix. And my colleague Edward Brookshire would want me to remind you that you'll probably want to employ third-party HR counsel so you don't shoot yourself in the foot, as these are very complex issues to manage. You'll also want to make plans to deploy new technologies relative to the return on the investment and disruption. It's probably obvious what I mean by return on investment, but the disruption is that any technology implementation can often go awry, and I think we've all been involved in some that have. This would not be the time to deploy a new CRM. However, there could be other technologies that are easily implementable and worth the effort to implement them now in this situation. And there's some that may be particularly relative to the new business plans that you've decided to undertake, and therefore it would be worth going ahead with these projects. Lastly, it may be time to ask the question, is it time to exit or sell the business? Perhaps you were going to sell the business in the future, and now, given what you've learned and the plans that you've made, it might be appropriate to make plans to go ahead and sell it now. Or perhaps you were never going to sell it, but the new horizon and the new plans indicate that now would be the time to sell. A couple of notes of caution here. One mistake I often see businesses make is they think that once it's time to sell the business, it's a relatively quick and easy process. It's put on the market by an advisor, and then the transaction happens, and it can happen in a couple of months. That's possible. It's usually not the norm. Usually, there's some cleaning up to do and some strategy alignment for the decision to sell that needs to be made. It might be cleaning up the accounting. It might be making sure that value drivers are in place. It might be making sure that golden handcuffs are in place. And I would advise any of you who are considering to do this to use a third-party expert to help you sell the business. We at V3 can help you, and there's others as well. But it's assistance that is very necessary. Let's recap where we are in our three-phase process to survive economic crisis, our path to success. We've completed the assessment phase, the first phase, where we gathered intelligence around 6 key areas of our business. Essentially, we got informed about the current situation, and we tried to get visibility into the short, intermediate, and long-term situations as well. In the second phase, the reformulation phase, the leadership team analyzed all the information from these assessments and formulated new business plans that entailed new strategies and tactics. Essentially, in the reformulation phase, we analyzed, made decisions, and made plans to implement those decisions. Now it's time for the third phase, the execution phase, where we will implement these new plans. It's now time to act. The execution phase is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We've assessed and analyzed and made plans, and those are all very important to our three-phase process, but it's now time to act. There have been some great books written about execution, one by Larry Bosty in particular, and we could prepare some slides telling you how to execute. But ultimately, execution is something that is done, not modeled, and it's unique to each company. And while we can help you execute, I think it's more important for the purposes of this presentation to remind ourselves of those general concepts that we mentioned at the beginning about surviving economic crisis. The first of which was that leadership mindset matters. It's a dynamic situation. New problems will arise constantly. You will often move 2 steps forwards and 1 step backwards. Key constituents, including employees, are stressed, professionally and personally. It's therefore important that the leadership team remains flexible, resilient, open, opportunistic, and empathic. This needs to be based on a culture of urgency. The perfect is the enemy of the good. Once you have good information and the team's analyzed it and come to a conclusion, make your decisions quickly and move on. Get stuff off your to-do list, therefore you can remain flexible to approach new problems along the way. This will require good data and feedback loops. Again, you'll want to constantly gather intelligence, and you want to communicate more rather than less, especially with key constituents. The 80-20 rule applies. And of course, all of this must be measured. It all gets rolled into your 16-week rolling cash flow model and into your short, medium, and long-term models with KPIs and dashboards. We've harped on this only because these are the key management tools. Your strategic plan has probably evolved as a result of this process. In general, it will evolve less than your short and your intermediate plans. My colleague Edward Brookshire would want me to remind you that that strategic plan is a good discipline tool to measure new alternatives that arise along the way against. New alternatives that involve slight deviations to the strategic plan are permissible. Those that involve large deviations probably aren't. Lastly, consider getting help. Turnaround skills are specialized and rentable. Those who have been in the turnaround business have likely been involved in a variety of verticals and a variety of crises, and they therefore can bring that experience to bear for your benefit. They also can view the situation dispassionately. In terms of the skills being rentable, these arrangements can be structured as fractional, interim, and temporary, and often more financially feasible than you may anticipate. If you think that we at V3 could be of assistance to you, please contact me, Bob Fitz, at bob@v3llc.co or visit our website, v3llc.co. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful. Good luck and be safe.